Hey everybody, Edie here. Welcome back to my channel and welcome if you're new. Today we're going to be doing a get ready with me using a couple of new products or sort of sample products, sort of getting a couple of first impressions. And then along with my get ready with me, something I'm going to want to continue to do is we're going to do a recap and review of a series that I've been watching. So to start, as you know, my face is primed and I've also already done my eyebrows, and as you can see, I have primed my lids, and the primer that I'm using is just to sort of, since I'm already started on that, is by Laura Geller. It is her Spackle waterproof eye primer, and this is in medium deep as the color that's on my eyes. And the palette that we'll be using is not super new. It came out last year. It's a reformulated palette of Ace Beaute. It's called the Tropical Vibes palette, and show you the colors. And it had gone out of stock, but it's now back in stock recently, and I jumped on it. So I was interested. I'm interested in greens, and this is a nice grungy, interesting green with a couple of pops of different colors, with the blue here and this sort of brick red, if you will, or orangey brown. Okay, so that's what we'll be using here. And then also I'll be using the sample foundation from Danessa Myricks. She does have a new concealers and foundations coming out. I believe that I saw that on Trend Mood on Instagram. And this is her Vision Cream color. So we'll be using one of the little pots that I got in here as the foundation, and the other one as sort of a brightening concealer. And then another little new thing, and just like I said, just a couple things that I got a sample of, is from Giorgio Armani. This is his Lip Power. And I'm going to be using this color here, which is, I believe, called Selfless. So we'll see what it looks like by itself, and then, of course, with the lip liner, which is really how I have to use it, because you can see it's quite light. All right. So the series that I'm going to be recapping and reviewing is called Severance. It's on Apple TV. It's I know it's definitely directed by Ben Stiller, and maybe also, if not by himself, also written by Ben Stiller as well. And the lead character lead actor in it is Adam Scott. And then we've also got some other well-known actors, Patricia Arquette, John Turturro, Christopher Walken makes a bit of an appearance in here, and so on. So let's go ahead and get started. My eyes are primed, but let me give you, before we jump right in, let me give you a synopsis of this. All right, Mark leads a team of office workers whose memories have been surgically divided between their work and personal lives. When a mysterious colleague appears outside of work to Mark, it begins a journey to discover the truth about their jobs. And basically it puts work-life balance to shame. It's a work-life balance to an extreme. And so very interesting show. I liked the trailers to it. It looked very interesting, and everything like that. The rest of the actors or characters / actors, we have, like I said, we have Adam Scott. He plays Mark, the lead character here. We then have actress Britt Lauer. I don't know a whole lot about her. She plays Helly R. We have Patricia Arquette, as I mentioned earlier. She plays their supervisor in the department. I mentioned that they're called Severed, and they work on the severance floor of the company that's called Lumen Industries. And so it's a basement floor that they work in, and their department is a micro refinement department. And their boss, their supervisor, is played by Patricia Arquette, and her character's name is Harmony Corbell. We also have Zach Cherry. Some people might know. He plays one of Mark's co-workers, Dylan. We've got John Turturro. A lot of people will know. He plays another co-worker of Mark. His name is Irving. And we've got, I mentioned Christopher Walken. He plays, almost, in these 3 episodes, he has very small appearance in the show, but he plays Bert. that works on the severed floor, but not in the same department that Mark works in, just a different department, actually called, I'll go ahead and mention now, called Optics and Design. We've got Trammell Tillman. I'm not familiar with him as an actor, but he plays, I'm going to call him the HR person. He's beneath Patricia Arquette, but he basically oversees these workers. I think technically maybe all the workers in the severed floor, if not the department itself. I'm not sure just yet. But he plays Seth Milchek, and then we've got Yul Vasquez, and he plays Petey, another co-worker of Mark. All right, so let's go ahead and get started on the eyes while I'm talking about episode 1, which is called Good News About Hell. Okay, so we open with an overhead shot of a woman, as far as the cold open scene, of a woman. She's passed out on top of a conference table. And we don't know anything about her, who she is or anything like that. But she's passed out, and eventually we hear a voice, and it immediately asks, "Who are you?" And she's waking up, she's groggy and whatnot, and it asks again, "Who are you?" She's like, what's going on? And she's freaking out. So basically what she starts to look around the room, and then starts to scurry around the room. There's one door, and it's locked. She finds out that it's locked, and she's asking to be let out. And again, we hear the voice through the speaker, "Who are you?" And they apologize. "Let me start over. I need to ask," the voice says, "I want to ask several questions, 5 questions. I have a 5-question survey for you." She's still trying to get out. "I don't know what's going on here." And he says, "Well, just answer the 5 questions. She's not quite sure what will happen. She eventually acquiesces and answers the 5 questions. Let me, we'll go through the 5 questions. But before that, let's see. I think the color I am going to start with is, I don't quite know what I'm going to do. Actually, let's start with this color here called Safari. We are going to do a green look, though. Maybe a green with this pop of blue here. Yeah, we'll mix that up. But we're going to start with Safari, sort of as the crease color. Okay. So I'm using one of my unit brushes, 309. So she acquiesces, and he begins to ask the question. The first question he goes back to is, "Who are you?" And this is when she first begins to realize she doesn't know. And he says, "Well, if you don't know, then just say unknown." But she's like, I don't know. So she's beginning to get a little freaked out about that she doesn't know. He said, "That's okay." And the second question he asks is, "Which state or territory were you born in?" And she's trying to think about it, and she's getting a bit more agitated, realizing she doesn't know. And he's like, "Okay, that's fine. That's fine." And she's getting a little more agitated. He then asks, the third question is, "Name any U.S. state or territory." And she's a bit agitated at this, and she's like, "Why? Just go ahead and ask." And she's like, "Fine, okay, Delaware." Good. Now so that tells us that she's not, well, she can't answer who she is or where she was born. She at least is aware of that kind of knowledge. Okay, just general knowledge in general. All right, so then the fourth question he asks is, "What is Mr. Egan's favorite breakfast?" Of course, we don't know who Mr. Egan is. And that's the interesting thing, at least about this cold open, is technically this woman represents us. We're in the same boat as she is. We don't know what's going on. Okay. So that's sort of an interesting aspect about this. So she's like, "I don't know. I don't even know what that question's about." He's like, "Okay, unknown, that's fine. No problem." And the fifth and final question is, what are the color of your mother's eyes? And this really throws her off because she's like, I don't know. I don't know. And he's like, congratulations, you've got a perfect score. And then right after that, we see the door open and we see a shadowy figure. We don't know who this is, although we definitely know based on if you know who Adam Scott is and you recognize his voice. So we recognize the voice as Adam Scott. Okay, so that's the end of that scene. And then when after credits, we then are introduced to Mark. Mark is in the parking lot. It's the morning work day. We don't know what day it is, but it's the morning. And he is crying, heavily crying. We don't know what's going on or anything like that. He looks at his watch and then proceeds to stop crying and clean his face. We don't know what's going on. We just know he's definitely sad. He carries himself that way. And everything. And so we get introduced to the front of the building of Lumen Industries. It's a large parking lot, large corporate headquarters sort of looking building. Okay. So he heads in, puts his badge on, heads in. And then, of course, he's got to be checked in two places. He's called into the department when he first enters into the building. It's interesting. He can't just walk in. He has to have the security card called down to the department and they say, okay, it's fine. The reason for this, and I think what happens, we find out a little bit later, so I'll go ahead and mention it now, is that the co-workers, his co-workers, come in and leave at staggered times. So none of them work a standard 9-to-5 job or 8-to-5, whatever it is. It's staggered by about 15 minutes, I think, between them. So I think that's what's sort of happening there with regards to that. He then heads into a locker room, and this is where we see him take off his badge, and he retrieves a different badge. His badge that he came in with has his face, his name, everything on it. And then the badge he takes and replaces is a blue badge with just the Lumen Industries logo on it. He then also, interesting enough, changes his watch to a watch that he had in his locker. So he changes that. So he's aware that he's got to put on a different watch. Most likely his work self has no idea. And then, of course, he puts on a suit jacket, he gets up, and he then goes to another security guard to go down in the elevator. And at this point, he has to be scanned to make sure he's not taking. So they are truly trying to keep their lives separate. They are not allowed to come in or leave with anything that was not already approved, is going to be my understanding with this. All right. And then as he's going down in elevator, he's, like I said, he was sobbing heavily. He looks quite depressed, kind of carries himself that way too. But as he goes down the elevator, or just before the door opens, we do hear a little ding. I don't know if that's throughout, but as he goes down, we hear this ding, and as he's going down, his demeanor, it's almost like a different person sort of change. It's very subtle, but he stands straighter. He looks a little, not so droopy in a sense, looks a little more pep and everything like that. So a very big difference. And then we're introduced to the severed floor, which is a bright white hallways, bright lights. And then he's walking through the hallways, and it's like, when are you going to get to your department? Because he's making turn after turn after turn. It's kind of like a maze, and maybe like a rat in a maze, if you will. All right, so, or green here called Army. So we'll go with that. And use that sort of to deepen the crease and put it on the edge. This is the 4 brush. This is Precision Crease Brush. All right, so he's walking through the halls. He's got a bit more pep in his step and everything like that. Interestingly enough, he pulls out the tissue that he used to clean his face with. And he's looking at it, and he's not quite sure why he has it. But we realize that, and so he throws it away. But he's heading down the hall and eventually gets to a large room. The room is pretty much empty, and it just has a cubicle of 4. And we're introduced to his colleagues, Irving and Dylan. And so they enter in, and they start immediately, they get started to work. They've got these standard computers are kind of 70s looking and everything like that. They're chatting. They're wondering where their other coworker is, Putty. They're not quite sure. They think he might be sick or something like that, but he hasn't made it in yet. So going back into Safari here just to, because I do want that kind of to show up at the top here. Okay, so as they're discussing, we're introduced to another character that I mentioned. We're introduced to Milchek. And what's interesting about that, when Milchek comes into the room, he's like, "Good morning, everybody." They immediately stand up for the most part, except for Dylan. Dylan doesn't, but Irving, who's played by John Turturro, and Dylan's played by Zach Cherry, immediately stand up and of course greet him. He seems friendly enough, but how they respond to him says that maybe there's something more about him that we got to keep our eye on, sort of as the audience in a sense. But he asks to speak with Mark, or he wants Mark to come with him. And then we're good at that. When that happens, we're introduced to his supervisor, Miss Corbell. And it's here that we learn that a little bit more about their coworker, Putty. And we find out, and Mark finds out, that Putty has basically left. He will not be returning. Now, we don't know. Also, what's interesting, when he goes in to talk to Miss Corbell, she says, along with myself, Mr. Milchek, we have the board here. The board is coming through a speaker. Now, what's interesting about the board, and through all the episodes where the board is there, we don't know anything about the board, who they're made up of, how many. They are just represented by this speaker, and we don't hear them or anything. So he says hello, they don't respond or anything like that. And this is where he's like, and they finds out that he'll be taking, since Putty is not returning, he's going to be taking Putty's position as department chief. So now he tries, what's interesting is, he tries to ask, well, what happened to Putty? They will not tell him. And it turns out that his relationship, Putty was a work friend to him. They had a very strong friendship in this situation. Okay, let's try to deepen this up a little bit. We're gonna go in with this brush, I think. This brush I don't know, but it's a domed brush. No longer says, but I'm going to use this color called Cave just to deepen the outer V with right here. Okay, so they won't tell him anything in terms of what happened to Putty. So we don't know if Putty is dead or what at this point, in terms of what's going on. All right, so his first, and so they let him know his first activity or task as department chief is to do a training. And this is where we get this training is of a new person who's going to be taking over Putty's, not as the chief, but Putty's position, because it's a 4-person department. And so this is, we then realized that this training, this orientation training, is with the woman that we saw on the table. So we had her perspective in the beginning. We're now going to get the perspective of the training through Mark's eyes, or in general. So to go through that. So then, just to pick up, he introduces himself. Hi, my name's Mark. You're Helly. And of course, you've been severed. And she proceeds to ask him, am I food? And he's like, I don't understand. Am I food? I have no memories. Did you grow me to eat me? And he's like, no, you're not food. You've been severed. And you work here at Lumen Industries, he tells her. And he's following a script in the book and everything. He's like, please come sit down. She's like, I want to be let out. He's like, no, come on. Let me tell you a little bit about what's going on, that kind of stuff. She's still agitated, and then in his process of trying to explain what's going on, that she's severed and all this and what severed is, she proceeds to throw the speaker at him. So hits his head, and of course gives him a bit of an injury. And then they get it fixed, and Milchick comes in to explain to Helly again what's going on. And well, no, before they get to that point, he puts the script away, and he's very nervous about doing this, but he goes off script, and because they have some strict protocols with regards to their department and probably the Severed department in general. And so he says, look, let me just sort of explain. I went through this just like you. I found myself on this table, and you know what I wanted to do? I wanted to kill the voice that was coming through, and it turns out that was Petey, and we were best friends. So he said, you'll end up enjoying it here, that kind of thing. But she's still agitated. She's like, let me out. And he finally says, okay. And again, he's going off script here. He's like, we do know that if she asks 3 times to be let out, he has to let her out. And he tells her, ask me one more time. You've asked twice, ask me again to be let out. So she does. So he opens the door. She meets briefly Irving, because the door leads into a room next door. That's where they were viewing this through a computer camera and everything like that. And that's where he was speaking through. And so he proceeds to walk her to the stairwell. Now they finally get there, but he can't go down the hallway. He says, I can't go with you. I can't see it. I'm not allowed to see it, to go see the stairwell for her to leave. So fine, she goes to the stairwell. Now here's what's interesting. She first looks out. What we can see through the window of the door is that it's a concrete sort of stairwell. Again, they're in a white, brightly lit hallway. So she looks out. So then she proceeds out, and then, because we're now in her perspective, and she pushes in the door, but when she comes back in, she's right back into the hallway. And she's like, wait a minute. So she tries again, and what we see is it's just basically kind of like a loop. She pushes the door, and it's bringing her right back into the hallway. So that's quite interesting from that. So she walks back down the hall. She's like, I can't leave. Yes, you can. He's like, yes, you can. Go ahead. Just give it a little more oomph. And so she runs down the hall, and we see her push through the door and trip and fall into the stairwell. So we sort of end there. And then we see her come back, and she's like, I can't leave. I didn't leave. He's like, yes, you did. You did leave. But clearly your outside person doesn't want you to leave. So he then takes her to the their cubicle space, where their department, and she's formally introduced to everybody, and we sort of leave there. Okay, so, oh my goodness, already 23 minutes, crap. Okay, so let's see, the next color that I'm going to do the lid is we're going to do this Seychelles, this pop of blue, and it's Seychelles. That's what we're going to go in with. Okay, and so I am going to use, I found that the unit brush is I got the unit brushes from my Beautylish box. So this is 308 unit brush. So we're going to use that. And we're also going to spray it. All right, so we then, the second half of this, oops, I didn't want to do 2 sides of that, is we get to see Mark's outside life. And so that's where we are introduced to Mark's outside life. So he leaves and goes back up the elevator. We see, of course, the demeanor change with him as he goes back up the elevator, and he proceeds to leave. We find out when he goes home that he is alone. We don't know yet if he's married or was married or anything like that, but he lives alone. Later on, we're introduced to his sister. He's forgotten that that he's supposed to be going to her and her husband's no dinner party, which is kind of funny. His brother-in-law is an interesting character. So I think in their travel to the park, that's where, yeah, they briefly discuss about his life, what's going on and everything. She's asking him if he's going through therapy, and that's where we find out that his wife is deceased. And he's like, no, I'm not doing therapy, but that's why I do the Severance department. He has joined, he's been there 2 years, and so that's probably about how long his wife has been deceased, to not have to think about that part. And she's like, his sister's like, that's not a way to heal your grieving, to forget about it for 8 hours. So that's basically, at the dinner party, we find out that Mark, when he introduces himself to the other guests, that he was a history teacher. And although we find that he explains himself because his brother-in-law outed him with regard to the Severance department. This is also where we kind of find out that the Severance, what do I want to call it? Procedure and everything is something that's probably been around at least a few years. We don't know how long, but at least at least we know that Irving's been there for 3 years. So at least 3 years, although they had another person even before Putty that was there. So we're not quite sure how long, but, and it's also not secret. So we know that the community is certainly aware of it. And you have two sides to this Severance procedure. You have those who think it's amoral and those who find it, hey, it's a choice that a person's making, so they've got the freedom to choose that. And so that's sort of interesting. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention, when Mark left that evening, on his car, on his windshield, was a gift card from Lumen discussing that how he got his injury, which, if you realize, they don't know what's going on. They have no idea what's going on between their work lives and their personal lives. And now what's also interesting is Lumen didn't say that somebody threw something at his head, that his coworkers threw a speaker at his head. They said that, I can't quite remember, either fell downstairs, tripped, or something like that. Something fell on him in terms of, and so to accept the gift card to have a dinner, at this local restaurant, which is after he leaves he spends the night with his sister after the dinner party, but the next night he goes in to have dinner, and then that's where we're introduced to Putty, although we don't know yet it's Putty. He's about to eat dinner, and I should also mention throughout this, we're kind of introduced sort of through his neighbor. So because he's constantly having conversations with his phone, his neighbor sounds like she's an elderly neighbor, Mrs. Selvig. She has issues with when to put out her recycling bin and her trash bin, and because he lives in a townhouse community, they share in a sense, the receptacle in terms of where they put the bins. So he's constantly having conversations on his phone with Mrs. Selvig. She's and everything like that. So that's someone. Either we're just going to be introduced to her just through this sort of scenario, never really seeing her kind of thing, or there'll be more with that. But at any rate, as he's sitting down, this guy sits down at the now I want to do an inner eye look, but I'm thinking I usually go with a shimmer. I was thinking about doing this one, which is called Rainforest, but I think I'll use Mango, which is a matte. We'll try that matte, bright yellow. We'll see how bright it is. But this person, it turns out, it's Putty, his coworker. Now, Mark doesn't know who this is. He has no idea who Putty is at all. So, and we don't know, but he's like, I'm your coworker. I work at Lumen with you. And he's like, what? I work with you. You don't know that, but I do. And he's like, I'm currently going through reintegration. And so he tells him, he basically says, look, I want to talk to you more. There's a lot more going on that you don't know about this company. And he proceeds to give him a card, and it piques Mark's curiosity, but you can meet me tomorrow at this address, basically. So then Mark goes home, and as he's about to enter in his home, we then do actually get introduced to his neighbor, Mrs. Selvig. Now we hear her. Before, it's always him. We're having a one-sided conversation on this phone with Mrs. Selvig. Now we do hear her. And if you are familiar with Patricia Arquette, you realize before we even see her, I think this is Patricia Arquette. This is his boss, Corbell. And then the camera pans to her, and sure enough, it is his boss. But her character is Mrs. Selvig. Now, some people had this theory at this point. Is Corbell and also Milchek, the heads of the higher levels of these employees, is she severed? We don't know. I suspect at this point, my suspicion is that she is not severed. Okay, so that's my suspicion, that she's not severed. This is not as bright as I was hoping. I wonder if this other color, let's try this other color called Chartreuse down here. It's a greeny, fluorescent greenish color. Let's try that. But, so we find out. So that's the end of episode 1. Okay. Okay. All right. So, oh yeah, this is much brighter. I'm sorry, we're getting introduced to Helly. We actually, and I didn't mention this, Helly did see her video in the first episode about her agreeing to the procedure. So it's a video of her reading the card and saying, I agree and I understand. And I realize that being severed is a permanent situation. So that's something also we learned. All right. And so episode 2, they sort of pick up with that video. But it actually is not the video. It's actually her outside self, reading the card to the camera. And Milchek is videotaping her agreeing to this severed procedure. And so he takes her down. We actually do get to, through her, get to see what the procedure is like. And what's interesting about Lumen, and we kind of got a little bit of a hint with the dinner party, is people are trying to figure out what does Lumen do. And it looks like they've got their hands, they're like a conglomerate or something like that, got their hands and everything. And we get a little bit of that with regards to when she's in the procedure, and it's doctor has to shave her head, or they don't shave her head, but they cut through her scalp and drill in, because what they're going to do through her brain is put a chip. But everything in there, the equipment and everything, has Lumen Industries on it, including the chip. So we see where they insert the chip. We've got computers that kind of show what's going on and where the chip is going to go. And she kind of looks like she gets a little drowsy. We then also get another scene we get to see is when she was trying to leave the day before. They're taken back to that as well. So when Helly goes through the stairwell, she wakes up into her outside self, and she meets Milchek in the stairwell. And Milchek says, hey, she's like, where am I? What's going on? Oh, it's okay. This is part of what goes on. This happened. She's like, am I trying not to stay? He's like, not a problem. No, this is just part of what goes on. It's okay. Go back in. And then she comes back out, and she's like, do I truly not want to stay? It's okay. We go through this. It's just part of the procedure. No problem. And then he's talking on his walkie or cell phone. I'm not sure what. And that's when we see where she had run through the door and fell. That's where she falls. And again, he's like, it's okay. It's okay. This happens. It's not a problem. So they take her back in and everything like that. Okay. We then are also get to see a little bit of the tasks of Mark as the new department chief. He comes in, turns on the lights. He's got a checklist of things that he needs to do. Although a couple of interesting tidbits about that is one of the things he has to do is acknowledge the portrait of Keir Egan. Keir Egan, we find out through more of the episodes, is the founder of Lumen Industries. And he has to sort of acknowledge it. And he also has to self-assess himself. Does he have the capability of leading department? And it's not interesting. It's not in general, but today. How does he feel today to lead his department? Okay. So then he's getting things prepared. And that's when Helly comes in and he tells her that, yeah, our starts are staggered. And she's like, I felt like I haven't left. And he's like, yeah, don't, because that's what it's like. They haven't left. And he's like, here's what I prefer to do, sort of feel in terms of how I feel. And do I feel a little more refreshed and eager to do things? That's how I realize that everything that I've left, in a sense, even though it feels like they haven't left. So, and in fact, they find out that it's been a whole weekend. So it's Monday. So they go through all that. So then we go through, they get to do sort of an introduction to themselves, and introduce themselves. What's interesting about this is they don't know really anything about themselves. They do speculate about what's going on in the outside world. Dylan thinks that it has to do with an apocalypse sort of situation, and that they're going to be living in the sea, and that the stuff that they do, and we do see a little bit more about what they do on their computer, is just these numbers, and they throw them into the bin. Dylan is they're all about productivity, and Dylan is very productive, and because he likes to get the prizes, and the prizes are some stupid things like finger wrestler thing. If he finishes a particular bin by a particular amount of time with 100% or close to 100%, he gets a caricature of him drawn of himself, and he's showing her that he's got several of them. And then in terms of the quarter, if he reaches in terms of what he's supposed to do, then he's got a waffle party. And apparently he is in line based on how productive he's been to get a waffle party. Telling her about all the stuff, and they have a little group section with Milchek, and the session is to get to know themselves, a little party, if you will. It's just the four of them. And then they introduce, but this is sort of where you realize that all they have is just their work selves. So they, there's not a whole lot that they tell about themselves. She's even like a little bit frustrated. She's like, how am I supposed to tell you about myself? I don't even know if I have a family, where I live, if I live in a house. What am I supposed to do with that? And he's like, it's okay. And everything like that. So that's sort of an interesting thing with regards to all of that. Okay. So she then asks, what's interesting, she asks, well, what happens if you want to quit? What do? He says, well, you write a resignation to your outside self. And by the way, they refer to themselves as innies, the work people, and outies. Outies are their outside lives. And that's where you write that to. But they warn her that it very rarely, if at all, do the resignation requests get answered. All right, so I said I was going to use a new sort of sample. This is the Danessa Myricks foundation. Again, it's the Vision Cream cover, and it is both a concealer and foundation. It has that capability. All right, so let's see how to get this open. Oh, here we go. And I'm going to use my fingers to sort of dab it on. It might be a little too dark, I don't know. I'm going to use this mirror a little bit bigger. Okay, so, oh no, actually, maybe a little dark, but it'll be okay. So she then proceeds, they're also taking a group picture. And by the way, we learn a little bit more about the co-workers. Irving is a very by the rules, by the protocol sort of person. And he has noticed they had pictures of the original four group, him, Putty, Mark, and Dylan. And what happens is Mark has, he feels a certain kind of way, a little bit sad about the picture, about Putty. So he knows they're going to have a new one. He's not supposed to do this, but he puts the pictures away. And he mentions that he went against protocol. So that's sort of interesting because, he says, we don't know what happened to Putty. We don't know if he's dead or anything like that. And this is where we get a little bit more about Milchek, in the sense that he tells Putty to stop with what he's doing and what he's saying, because he's sort of scaring the other people a little bit. And Milchek is like, we don't focus on that. And this is also where Milchek says, look, this is an opportunity to mention that you guys, you don't have to experience death the way we do, that your outies do. Okay, so that's a privilege that you guys have, is that you don't have to experience that. So again, like I said, Helly is trying to leave, so she writes a note that she's going to take and give to her outside self, and they say you can't leave with it. But you can see this is quite warm. I'm quite I'm quite red. And you can't leave with it. And they're like, what? She's like, why? And he says, because the elevators and the stairwell and everything have code detectors. She doesn't believe it. So she then goes to try it. She leaves the office space and goes and tries it. And when she goes in, it does go off. Red lights go off and everything like that. And we introduce another character. This is Mr. Grainer. Mr. Grainer is maybe this sort of the security person of the place. But Mark says, look, he basically takes the fall for her leaving. He says, look, because he knows that her leaving, she's going to get in trouble for trying to take this note out. And he's like, Mr. Grainer, it's my fault. I'm her supervisor. And so he's taken to the break room. It's not your traditional break room. We don't know anything about what this break room is or anything like that. But it's a dark hallway. He's locked in this hallway, and at the end of it, we see Miss Corbell at the end. So that's where we are sort of introduced there to the break room, whatever happens in the break room. All right. So let's see. Let's see. We then go back into, right now we don't know, we got a little bit about Helly's sort of outside life, but just as her coming into the company. Everybody else we don't know. We learn in a sense that Milchek is probably not severed, because we saw in the beginning that he brought Helly in, was with her on the outside and everything like that. So to be in those two places, he's not severed. And so on. Still not quite sure about Miss Corbell. We find out a little bit more. So Mark, we go to outside Mark's life, and so he's on an awkward date. That's when we see a little bit more about the issues of being severed. As he leaves the date, we find out that Mark is gung-ho about it, and there's this group of kids telling people that Severance is bad, and he confronts them and so on. So we see all that. Unfortunately, the date ends not well. And then that's when we get to see Miss Selvig. She goes and gives him cookies and everything like that. One of the things we found out Miss Selvig is that, or Miss Corbell had mentioned that her mother was an atheist in this previously. And then Miss Selvig introduces her mother as a Catholic and so on, to give him a little bit of spiritual guidance, as you will, a little bit there. So she brings him cookies and things like that. The next day, Mark decides he sees the card. He's about to go to work, but he sees the card that Putty had given him, so he's curious. So he goes to meet Putty. Putty is staying in a dilapidated greenhouse. And so we learn more about what's going on in reintegration, that he's got reintegration sickness, and it's basically him seeing, sort of having visions of his work self and things like that. And apparently it hurts a bit to this reintegration. We find out that Putty is not working with the group of kids. I forget what it's called, that organization. He's working with someone else. We don't know who these people are. But Putty, while he was there, maybe it started to happen while he was there at work. And so he started to map out the space to try to figure out what's going on. He shows, and he tells Mark that he has hidden it there as well. And so on. Mark had called in. So what's interesting is his coworkers are like, well, what's going on? How is Mark? What's going on? They don't tell them or anything like that. So that's interesting. Now with Irving, we go back to the office. There's more discussion about the numbers. Helly's wanting to figure out why. How do you know what to, because they, like I said, on the computer, they have these numbers that are flowing around. They'll put them in the bin. We don't know anything about the numbers, but how do they know what to bin? And they basically say, well, it's scary. You just know, you just have a feeling, because this is the next day, I should say. Mark is back into the office, and so on. But also, just before that, we see Irving, he's dozing off. And then he starts to daydream. And what he's daydreaming is this black sludge coming over the cubicles. What's interesting about this black sludge is it is in the intro scene, the introduction scene, or, the scene that they have before the show starts with the music and everything like that. There's this black sludge. So that's something that's interesting. And Irving's been there 3 years, and I'm kind of speculating, and they don't know this yet, is it possible after a period of time of being severed, does the brain start to try? Because if you think about it, when you think about brain injuries, particularly with younger people, but maybe in a sense with older people too, the brain is always trying to make new connections in a sense. So you're kind of wondering, is it possible that the brain is trying to make new connections to this severed part of their brains kind of situation? That could be reintegration. We don't know. But at any rate, Milchek says, because he wakes up, he jerks up, and then he has to go to, he's potentially to get in trouble for dozing off. We find out for dozing off that his outside self will have part of his paycheck deducted for the amount of time that he had dozed off. We don't know how long. It just, sometimes it seems like you're just like that, a couple of seconds. But at any rate, he's like, I don't want to take you to the break room. Milchek says this. So he takes him to this wellness place, and this is where we get introduced briefly to Bert, Christopher Walken, and they're looking at this weird painting of, we guess, Keir Egan, sort of in the Greek sort of view, and there's this goat and some other characters. He's slashing a whip at this goat that's dressed up. Don't know why or what that's about. So here we go. Oh, let's go ahead and up there, we're going to put this concealer on. I'm going to use concealer brush. Here we go. This is a Luxie brush, 210 concealer brush. All right. We're going to put it here, here. See how this works. So, but what's interesting is he meets, so they briefly discuss, we find out that Bert is part of a two-man department in the severed floor called the Optics and Design. They do the books, the totes, and all this. And Irving is very intrigued because he's like, oh, I love the stuff that you do. And he's like, did you paint this? He's like, no, we just hang this stuff. And like I said, it's a creepy portrait of Keir Ergen and everything like that. So no, we just hang it. But he's definitely intrigued and a fan of Bert. So that's our introduction to Christopher Walken's character. And so on. So then he goes into his wellness, which is interesting. It's the scene is there's music, and basically what happens is his therapist, if you will, says, I'm going to play you or read off to you a list of positive things about your Audi, and he's not supposed to he's supposed to give equal praise, if you will, or to all the things. He's not supposed to be more happy about one thing over another, if you will. So that's sort of something there. Okay. So then, and then, he hears different things. His Audi likes the sound of radar. His Audi likes water. his Audi is good at lovemaking and those type of things. And so then he does respond more positively to those things. She says, okay, you cannot do that. We're going to deduct points if you do any more of this. The session ends. And he's like, okay, so he can't respond to any of that. So that's kind of interesting and funny about that. Sort of contour. I'm still not good at contouring my nose, but we will keep trying till I get it. Okay. All right. So that's so in episode 2, toward the end, back in the office, Helly finally sees the numbers, and she's calling the guys up, scared what to do. This is again the date. Mark is still not there. Oh, I may have gone into a little bit of episode 3 with Mark coming back, but oh well. But so then they say, okay, just, you see that she has this feeling, it scares her and everything like that. I'm using Colourpop translucent and caramel for under the eyes and everything like that. And so she bends her first set of numbers. And so that's how that day goes. But then Mark, and then we go back to the outside, Mark has decided to bring Putty to his house. And Putty's going to stay in the basement. Nobody can see. We do get, this is well, it's episode 3 that we really get an understanding of Corbell and Mrs. Selvig. All right, so, and so they're talking more. This is where we see at the end of this episode, episode 2, this is where we see the more issues with regards to being reintegrated and so on. Putty gets sick. He goes into the bathroom to shower. He gets a bloody nose. And it ends with him sort of kind of staring blankly at the end of in the shower. We don't know if he's dead or anything. We hear Mark outside the door asking if Putty's okay. So that's the end of episode 2. Okay. I'm at an hour. All right. So what I'm going to use for all over before I get into the rest of my eyes is... I had used this from Colourpop Pretty Fresh Dark 20. It's a pressed foundation, but you can also use it as a setting powder. So I'm going to use this as a setting powder. And it'll light me up a little bit. So for and I'm going to put blush on. So episode 3 is basically we pick up where we left off with regards to Putty in Mark's basement. He actually has survived. He comes out of the shower, and what's interesting, while he was in the shower, we get to see some other side effects of his reintegration. He is having visions of his work life. They're sort of intermingling and everything like that. So everything is okay there. So the next morning, Mark takes off for work. He leaves Putty by himself. Putty is trying to finish the map and everything like that. But as Mark leaves, this is where we get, I mentioned, we're not quite sure if Mrs. Selvig is, oh, I'm sorry, this is not the blush. I'm going to use that as highlight. The blush I'm going to use is from Colourpop here. And this is in Toffee Cake Pressed Powder Blush. And this was actually sent to me on accident. So there we go. I was supposed to get some other lippies, but that's okay. All right, so so Mark leaves, and as he's leaving, we see Mrs. Selvig. She's on her porch melting the ice. She says bye to Mark, but then when he's completely gone and out of shot, driven off, we then get, this is where we get 100% confirmation that she is not severed. She knows completely what's going on. She has a key to his house. Something that we learned earlier and I didn't mention is that where he lives, we know that it's subsidized by Lumen Industries. And he's told Petey, because Petey was worried about being seen in his basement, that, hey, I don't have a neighbor next door to me. Mrs. Selvig is on the other side and another unit next door to me, but not connected. And there's very few people that live in the whole sort of division, townhouse division. But we see that Mrs. Selvig has a key to his house, and she goes snooping. Petey is downstairs and he hears her and he hides, but she goes into his basement. She's snooping and everything like that. And then what's interesting, she takes a candle of his ex-wife with her. We don't know why, but she takes it with her. But at that same time, she gets a call because there's stuff that's going on at the office, and it has to do with Helly, of course. So this episode 3 is called Perpetuity, and episode 2, I didn't mention this, is called Half Loop. But in this episode 3, like I said, we pick up, Mark goes into work, and the night before, Mrs. Selvig also was watching Mark through his house in terms of what she saw, and sees that he's lonely, and she kind of cares about that a little bit. So, but we don't know a whole, like when she's at work, she's kind of icy, but she ends up meeting Mark at work, and so on. So, it's because, Helly is trying now some new strategies. She wants to quit, to leave. She's like, what if I write quit? She finds out, so she does another strategy. She locks herself in the bathroom, and she's let me out, but part of it's on one arm, the bottom part's on the other arm. Then she tries to stuff a note into the cap, and then breaks it off, and she's going to proceed to swallow it. And this is where Mark says, look, it's not going to work. The code detectors will pick it up, and let me just save you the hassle of Milchek trying to get it out of you, and just go ahead and give it to me. But I guess if you want to know sooner or later, he's going to have to get out of one end or the other. One's a little easier than the other, but it's just not going to work. So then that's when Irving says, well, why don't we go to the perpetuity department? And so he asks Miss Corbell, and this is where we find out they've got forms and documents, a lot of bureaucracy with regards to this and everything, and so on. So that's all going to be taking place. All right, let's finish this look. I was going to do highlighter, but I don't feel like doing highlighter. So let's finish the look with the lipstick. Let's see if we can get that. So we do go to the perpetuity department, and this is basically a museum in the department. On their way to the perpetuity department, they have a funny scene. They meet up with Bert and his co-worker, and Dylan does not like the optics and design department. Again, Irving is enthralled with Bert in the optics department and everything like that, but apparently they discussed there was a coup. Dylan does not like Bert and all this other type of thing, so we just don't know. But they said there was a coup, and it was bloody coup, and everything. But they don't know. It was before them, so they just don't know. So then they walk to the perpetuity department, and like I said, it's a museum with wax figures of all the CEOs. The CEOs are all Egans from the family and everything. So they get to hear a little bit about all of that. Also is in the museum is a replica, full-size replica of Keir Egan, the founder. The company's been in operations since the 1800s, but we have a full replica of his house. She uses this opportunity to escape, and she runs through the halls. They then realize she has disappeared. Mark is chasing her and everything. She has written on the perpetuity to bingo to be that she quits. She doesn't make it to the elevator. She makes it to the stairwell. The stairwell is locked, but she breaks the glass and she's putting it through the glass. And basically what's happening is in trying to get her head through so that she briefly at least wakes up and her outie sees it before she gets pulled in. But it doesn't happen, unfortunately. But that was her purpose when she couldn't get through the door. It was going to be in her outie's hands. Okay, it's not as light as I thought, but we are going to outline this. And I think I can outline it without the, whatchamacallit. So I'm using as my lip liner. I like this. This is Sephora. This is Molasses. Their, what is this called? Rouge Gel Lip Liner. So Mark reaches her, pulls her through. She cuts herself pretty bad. We don't know how that's going to be dealt with, but eventually she has to go. Mark does not throw himself on his sword, so to speak, and because Mr. Grainer comes and takes her to the break room. And what we find out more about the break room, but we do hear about it from Putty. I didn't mention this in episode 2, where Putty has somehow recorded, and I don't know how, but maybe he stole the recording. I think that's what happened. He stole it somehow. I don't know. I'm not quite sure what happened, but somehow he's got a tape of the break room, what's going on in the break room, and it's him repeating that he is sorry for whatever he's done, and Milchick saying, "I don't believe you," and him repeating it over and over again. So then we do see this happen. She's go down the long corridor, and she's introduced to the break room. She has to put her hands on this table, and it's a sort of a lie detector sort of situation, because on the other side is a little thing that reads, I guess, where her palms are, and Milchick asks her to read this apology document, and she has to keep repeating it. And Milchick says, "I don't believe you," but he's reading that sort of EKG, I'm not sure, whatever, and saying, "I don't believe you." And Mrs. Corbell is outside looking through a window that I believe that Helly can see her. Oh, and to go back, also, Putty, when he was hiding in the basement, he sees Mrs. Corbell, and he sees her as Selvig. Well, actually, she's on her way to work, but he has visions of her going through this. And I didn't mention in the last episode how it ends with regards to Putty. Putty, unfortunately, ends up leaving the house. He escapes to escape from Mrs. Corbell. And while he's doing that, he's, like I said, he's having these breaks, these visions of him in the office, and he's trying to do this map, and he's following the map, and then eventually it's night, and Mark has gone home, but realized Putty is not there, so he goes out to look for him. He sees an ambulance go by, and he's sort of like, let me follow this ambulance, I wonder what's going on. And he stops at this gas station. Putty has gone in, and he's having these visions. He's bleeding from his nose and everything. And he's trying to get food, but he's like, I don't have any tokens, because that's how they get in the vending machine. They have tokens. The ambulance comes. The ambulance has come. That's what Mark has followed, and they're trying to take him. That's when he sees that it's Putty, but he doesn't go up and say, there we go. I usually put my lip liner on first, but that doesn't look bad. All right. So that's it as far as my get ready with me. But to finish out, so Putty collapses. Actually, this is the end of 3, not to end of 2. It's end of 3, I think. And that's essentially it with regards to the show, episode 3. So we now know that most likely Milchick is not severed. Corbell is 2 characters, and she's not severed. She's there to watch Mark. At least in this situation. We don't know anything about the outside lives of the other 3 and all of that. So it's just really interesting It shows up, the show is Fridays on Apple TV, and again, it's called Severance, so it's a very good show. Lots of theories. I'm intrigued by it. I enjoy it. I think the characters are great. The actors are great, I should say. And it makes you sort of wonder in terms of what's going on with regards to all of them. Will we find anything out? That's it. All right, and I'll leave a description of some of the products that I used. Like I said, I used some samples and everything like that. I think the eye look came out pretty good. The bright colors, the bright mattes, not as bright as I would have liked, but I think it looks really good. All right, I like the palette. All right, so if you enjoyed that, again, thumbs up. Hope you guys subscribe. I'll be coming back with, it'll just be the next episode of Severance. I hope you liked this review and synopsis of Severance and my Get Ready With Me. And I hope you guys, if you have any comments, thoughts about the series or anything else, by all means, leave a comment. And I hope to see you again. And again, thumbs up, subscribe if you want, and have a great day. Have a great day. All right. Bye, everybody.